By 1970, America was already deeply torn apart by the Vietnam War. Thousands of young men were being drafted to fight in a conflict many believed had no clear purpose. Anti-war protests were spreading on college campuses nationwide, as students demanded an end to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. When President Richard Nixon announced the U.S. invasion of Cambodia in late April 1970, a move seen as an expansion of the war rather than a step toward peace, tensions boiled over. Kent State University in Ohio became one of the flashpoints. On May 1st, protests erupted on campus. By May 2nd, the unrest escalated. The ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, building was set on fire, and clashes between students and police grew more intense. The Ohio governor called in the National Guard to restore order. Instead of calming tensions, their presence inflamed them. Students saw soldiers with rifles and bayonets as a symbol of the government's heavy hand, while guardsmen saw angry crowds as a growing threat. On May 4th, thousands of students gathered for another protest, despite warnings to disperse. The atmosphere was tense. Tear gas was fired, rocks were thrown, and confusion spread across the campus green. Then, suddenly, shots rang out. National Guard troops, claiming to feel threatened, opened fire on unarmed students. In just 13 seconds, 67 rounds were discharged into the crowd. When the smoke cleared, 4 students lay dead: Allison Krauser, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, and William Schroeder. 9 more were wounded, some critically. None of the students killed had been armed. 2 of them weren't even part of the protest but were simply walking to class. Photographs from that day captured the horror, most famously the image of a young woman screaming in anguish beside the lifeless body of Jeffrey Miller. That picture became an icon of America's heartbreak. The shootings shocked the nation. Parents across the country realized that the Vietnam War was no longer something happening over there in Southeast Asia. It had spilled directly into their own backyards. Students were being killed not by foreign enemies but by their own government's troops. To many, Kent State symbolized the deep fracture in American society, the mistrust between young people and authorities, the fear between citizens and soldiers, and the tragic cost of a war that seemed endless. The backlash was immediate. Over 4 million students across the U.S. went on strike, closing more than 450 colleges and universities. Protesters filled city streets, demanding justice and an end to the war. At the same time, others defended the National Guard, arguing that the protests had gotten out of control. The debate only deepened America's divisions. In the end, no guardsmen were convicted of wrongdoing, which left many families feeling justice had been denied. Yet the legacy of Kent State was undeniable. It became a turning point in public opinion, pushing more Americans to question whether the Vietnam War was worth the cost, not just in Vietnam, but in the blood of America's own children. For U.S. audiences, Kent State remains heart-touching and unforgettable because it captured the tragedy of a nation at war with itself. The 4 students who died that day became symbols of innocence lost, and their memory continues to remind Americans of the dangers of fear, division, and violence when a nation turns against its own people.